Hi, everybody. Okay, it's time for my very favorite chapter, chapter 10. And here I am on a Sunday. The Bengals are playing, and I'm recording chapter 10 for you guys in my bedroom. You're used to seeing that. But I'm going to go ahead and start with chapter 10. So if you would please turn to page 111. And here we go. When Ben walks into science class the next day, 4 or 5 kids are crowded around Mrs. Tibbets's desk. He edges closer to see what they're gaping at. A large glass jar with 3 frogs, partially hidden in the mud and grass at the bottom. Peepers, he says. Nuh-uh, Frankie says, grabbing for the jar. It's frogs. Here, I'll shake 'em up so you can see 'em better. Ben starts to grab for the jar before the frogs get hurt. Just then, Mrs. Tibbets walks into the room. Okay. And everybody takes a step back except for Frankie, who's got the jar in his hands. Put it down, Frankie, Mrs. Tibbets says calmly. Frankie rolls his eyes and puts the jar back on the desk. Everybody in your seats, the teacher says. You'll all have a chance to look at our friends here. The students straggle back to their desk. When the room is quiet, Mrs. Tibbets holds up the jar and turns it around slowly. These little guys are hard to find, but now is a good time to catch them. You caught them yourself? Frankie asks. Of course. Cool, says Ryan. Can I see one? You can see them from here. I'm not letting them out today. There are pleads and groans, but Mrs. Tibbets ignores them. Has anyone ever seen one outside? Several kids shake their heads. You may not have seen them, but I'll bet some of you have heard them, Mrs. Tibbets says. She looks at Ben. How about you, Ben? Yeah, he says, not looking her in the eye. They're spring peepers. I've heard them behind my house. Can you make their sound for us? Mrs. Tibbets asks. Ben hesitates. Come on, Ben, Ryan says. Ben can feel everyone looking at him. He shrugs. I don't know. It's sort of a high peeping sound. He tries to imitate a peeper. Eep, eep, eep. A couple of kids laugh, but Jenny says, Oh, I've heard that noise. I heard it every night last week. Me too, someone else chimes in. Let's try it, says Mrs. Tibbets. Let's make a peeper chorus. All the kids start making peeping noises. They're having a great time. Making noise in the class is something no one ever lets them do. Mrs. Tibbets gives them about 30 seconds, then signals for quiet. Those little frogs make a big noise, Frankie asks. They sure do, Mrs. Tibbets says, almost laughing. Other amphibians make even louder noises. You can hear a bunch of spadefoots from a long, long way away, and when they're singing. What are spadefoots? Ryan asks. I'm talking about spadefoot toads, Mrs. Tibbets explains. Their name comes from the rough, shovel-like growths on their back feet. They use them like little spades to burrow into the ground. What do they sound like? Jenny asks. Like a big flock of crows cawing, the teacher says. Or some say they sound like hundreds of balloons being rubbed together. I haven't heard a noise like that, Jenny says. Well, spadefoot toads are very rare around here. In fact, they're listed as a threatened species in our state. And they only come out 1 or 2 nights a year, usually after a rainy spell in April. Mrs. Tibbets smiles. If we get a good rain next week, there's a chance they'll be out. Why only 1 night? Ryan blurts out. They don't have much time, the teacher says, because they only lay their eggs in pools that dry up. Vernal pools, says Ben. Mrs. Tibbets gives him a nod. Right, Ben. They choose temporary pools because their eggs will be safer there. There are no fish to gobble them up. But since these pools don't last long, they all have to work fast together. The males come out and sing, then the females come out and lay their eggs. The males fertilize the eggs. In 2 days, the tadpoles hatch, and within a month, they hop away as toadlets. So, it's all over very quickly. Most people don't even know they're there. Well, what happens to them then? Asked Jenny. They dig deep holes into the ground with their back feet and bury themselves into the wet earth, up to 8 feet deep. They stay there most of the time. That's why you can't find them during the rest of the year. It would be cool to see them, Ryan says. Well, I was thinking. Mrs. Tibbets lowers her voice about to a whisper like she's telling a ghost story. A sly smile spreads across her face. Did everybody catch that? Our vocab word from last week, sly. Everyone leans a little closer. If some of you were interested, we might have a little field trip one night next week. It just so happens I have a pool on my land where the Spadefoots come to breed. Would you like that? The kids all yelled their approval. How many of you think you might come? Half the class raises their hands. Ben feels empty inside, like something that belonged to him is being given away to others who don't care nearly as much as he does. He's dying to go, but he doesn't raise his hand. I've made some permission slips, and people who are interested need to take one and bring it back signed. Your parents will have to bring you to my house and pick you up afterwards. I'll let you know the last minute what day it will be, though. We'll just have to watch the weather. What day do you think it will be? Ryan asks. Well, they're forecasting rain for Wednesday or Thursday. Let's hope they're right. I don't think your parents will want you going on a field trip on the weekend. When Mrs. Tibbets hands out the permission slips, Ben takes one and stuffs it into his backpack. On the way back to Mr. Kutcher's class, Frankie sneers. Who wants to go into the woods with the frog lady? Not me. I do, Ben thinks, but I can't. Wait, Frankie yells. Her name isn't Mrs. Tibbets. It's Mrs. Ribbets. Ribbit, ribbit, he coughs. He's beside himself at how funny he is. Ben just glares at him. The next Monday, half the class brings in their permission slips. The other half either can't go or doesn't want to. Ben's permission slip is still in his backpack, unsigned. There's no rain that day or the next day. It's like Massachusetts has changed almost overnight from a cold, dark, rainy, muddy place into a sunny world full of life. The skies are blue every day, and the temperature rises into the 60s. On Wednesday, a few kids wear shorts to school. Is it going to be tonight? Ryan asked Mrs. Tibbets. He's asked that same question at least 24 times over the past 2 days. It doesn't look like it, the teacher says. It's got to really rain hard. Ben watches, feeling farther and farther away from everything and everybody. But what happens if it doesn't rain enough? Janice asks. The Spadefoots will wait until next year, Mrs. Tibbets says. They can wait 3 or 4 years before they lay eggs. 4 years? We'll never see them, Ryan wails. Nature takes its time, Mrs. Tibbets says. Unlike most people, nature is very patient. Thursday starts out sunny, but by 9 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of reading, the skies start to darken. By the time Ben gets to Mrs. Tibbets' class, it looks like it could start raining any second. Tonight? Ryan asked. Is it tonight? I don't think so, Mrs. Tibbets said. Most scientists think that the Spadefoots get their message from the rain seeping into the soil, so the ground won't be soaked enough tonight. But what if it happens over the weekend? Someone asked. We'll miss it. Let's just wait and see what happens, Mrs. Tibbets says. The skies stay gray, the clouds thicken, and the air feels damp and heavy, but the rain doesn't come. At home that night, Ben spreads out everything he has so far for his geography report. He's downloaded information off the internet and made notes on some index cards, but he can't seem to get interested. It all seems dry and boring. He's staring at the wall above his desk when he hears the phone ring. Ben, his mother calls. It's Toby. Sorry, guys, I need a little drink. Finally, Ben thinks. He's been sending his friend emails for days and hasn't heard back. He even called a couple of times and left messages. Lizard man, he says as he picks up the phone. Hi, Toby answers. His voice sounds uneasy. How's Arizona? Okay, how's Massachusetts? It stinks as usual, Ben says. Too bad, says Toby. Ben waits for Toby to say more, but he doesn't. He wonders why Toby called if he doesn't want to talk. Toby's always easy to talk to. The silence at the other end of the line feels strange. How's Lenny? Ben asks. Well, that's why I'm calling. Toby's voice is tight and thin. My mom said I should. Ben grips the receiver to his ear. Something happened, Toby finally goes on. He got sick or something, and I found him in the terrarium. Wait, Ben says. You mean he died? He's dead? Yeah, I don't know. I didn't mean to. They're both silent for a moment. I'm really sorry, Ben. Didn't you feed him right? Ben feels tears welling up in his eyes. What were you feeding him? No, I did. I mean, Dad said maybe he was older. Maybe he didn't like the change when he came to my house. But you were supposed to take care of him. I know it wasn't my fault. I didn't. Ben can tell that Toby is close to tears too. He doesn't know what to say. He's afraid he's going to get so mad he'll say something really stupid. Okay, Ben mutters. I'll talk to you later. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Ben hangs up first. He puts his jacket on and goes outside where no one can see or hear him. This is stupid, he tells himself. The dumb lizard was 2,000 miles away. You probably never would have seen him again anyway. But Ben feels like he's lost more than a pet. He sits down on the back steps and stares out into the woods behind the house. The spring peepers are calling, and so are the American toads. He looks up. He can't see any stars. He wonders when the rain will start and what makes him think of the Spadefoots. He'd love to see them, but that would mean he'd have to talk to Mrs. Tibbets. Thinking about Mrs. Tibbets makes him think about the snakes and his dead lizard. And it just goes around and around in circles until his stomach tightens up again. Ben, are you out there? His father calls out the back door. The light comes on. Yeah, Ben answers. What are you doing? Listening, he says. Well, it's time to come in unless you're planning on spending the night out there. That sounds like a good idea to Ben. At least out here he wouldn't have to deal with people. But he gets up and trudges onto the back porch. You okay? His father asks. Ben nods. Yeah, just wondering if it's going to rain. Feels like it to me. Ben tries to slip by his father, but his father grabs his shoulder and looks at him. You sure you're okay? My lizard died, Ben says. He knows it's more than that, but it's the simplest thing to say. His father wraps his arms around Ben and just holds him there for a little while. Ben buries his face in his father's sweater. It smells like his dad. Things will look better in the morning, his dad says. Why don't you give it up, and go to bed? Ben nods. He goes back into his room and puts on his pajamas. He doesn't really care about his homework. He doesn't care much about anything. I wonder why Ben feels like he's lost more than just a pet here. So think about that too as we continue to read. Ben wakes up in the middle of the night. Sheets of rain are lashing against the windows of his room. He buries down deep in the blankets. He is like a spadefoot, deep down in the earth. He falls asleep listening to the sounds of the rainstorm. It's still raining when Ben gets up. At breakfast, he goes through his backpack, finds the permission slip from Mrs. Tibbets, and asks his mom to sign it. She reads it over and frowns. Ben, it says here this is for a weeknight. But it didn't happen yet. It might happen tonight because it's raining now. But I can't imagine she'll have kids come over to her house on Friday night. But what if she does? Just sign it, please. Ben pleads. His mother signs the paper and hands it back to him. You're lucky to have a teacher who will spend time with you outside of school, she says. Yeah, Ben says. I know. Ben doesn't have science on Fridays, but after lunch he goes to Mrs. Tibbets' room. She's sitting at her desk peeling an orange. Hi, Mrs. Tibbets, he says. Hello, Ben. He walks over and hands her the permission slip. This is a little late, she says. I thought there was some reason you didn't want to come. I know. Ben takes a deep breath and clears his throat. But I was thinking, if you're going to look at the Spadefoots, I'd like to come. Mrs. Tibbets puts down her orange and peers at Ben. There's no field trip now, she says. I'd said I'd only do it on a weeknight. It's Friday. I know, but Ben can feel the secret inside him trying to work its way out. But he can't tell her what happened. He just can't. He swallows. But I still want to come with you to look at for the Spadefoots. Have your parents call me, Mrs. Tibbets says. If it's okay with them, I'd love to have you. Okay, says Ben. Do you think tonight's the night? Seems like it to me. It's now or never. Okay, Ben says. I'll bring my new boots. New boots, huh? Says Mrs. Tibbets with a smile. Okay, I'll be waiting to hear from your parents. Are you almost ready? Ben's mom calls out. Mrs. Tibbet said she'll be by for you in 10 minutes. I'm ready now, Ben says, hurrying into the living room. I want to go too, whines Agatha. You don't even like frogs. Ben wonders if there's actually a chance his parents would let her go. He hopes not. I told you no, Angie, Mrs. Maroney says. You have a gymnastics meet tomorrow. You'll need to be in bed early. I still want to go, Agatha says. You still can't, Ben says. Humph, Agatha says. She spins on her heels and heads off to her room. Ben parks himself on the arm of the sofa where he can see the street. It seems like he's waiting forever, but finally Mrs. Tibbet's old station wagon pulls into his driveway. Are you sure you want to go out tonight? His mom asks. It's really pouring. Ben rolls his eyes. It has to be raining, Mom. That's when they show up. You're going to get soaked, his mother says, smiling. He can tell that she's happy he's going. I've got a raincoat, Ben says, and these. He holds up his new boots. His mother shakes her head. Well, you wouldn't catch me wading around in all that muck. She reaches up to zip up his coat. She can't help herself. Mom, I can do it, he says. He pulls his hood over his head and dashes out the door. You ready? Mrs. Tibbets asks once he hops into the car. Ben nods. Good, you can put the waders on when we get back to the house, she said. You're going to need them. They drive through the night with the rain pattering on the car roof and the tires hissing over the wet roads. Mrs. Tibbets keeps a one-way conversation going the whole time. He hasn't seen anyone this excited since they took his sister Agatha to ride horses on her 7th birthday. I've never seen a more perfect night. I just can't wait. I'm wondering how many there'll be this year. The last time I was out on the right night, there must have been a dozen pairs. We'll just have to see. A dozen pairs? That's all? Ben asked. That doesn't seem like very many to him. That's all? Of course. When my husband and I first started counting them, there were lots more. And as far as I know, no one else has ever spotted any Spadefoots in the area. We found a few other vernal pools, but no Spadefoots. Ours is the only place. Mrs. Tibbets cuts her sentence short, and Ben looks over at her. There must be some other ones around here somewhere, he says. I don't know. There aren't many left. The state now lists them as threatened and on the verge of being endangered. You mean endangered like almost extinct? Like the golden toads down in Costa Rica? Right. There are still plenty of eastern Spadefoots in other states, but the numbers have really dwindled in Massachusetts. Why? Well, it's the furthest north that they live. It's the farthest north that they live. There are fewer and fewer places for them to call home. Too many people, too many trees coming down and houses going up. Habitat loss. She flips on her turn signal and slows down. But let's not talk about that. Tonight, our mission is to see how they're doing. Mrs. Tibbets leans over the steering wheel and peers through the windshield. She slows even more until they're barely moving. What are you doing? Looking for toads or salamanders. This is the place where they like to hop over the road to get to the pool. I find a couple of squished toads every year. Look, there's something moving right there. Mrs. Tibbet steps on the brakes and they lurch to a stop in the middle of the road. She's crazy, Ben thinks, but then he sees a small form in the beam of the headlights. Go look, Ben, see what it is. Ben looks in both ways for cars. The road is quiet and dark in either direction. Then he opens the door. Be careful, Mrs. Tibbets warns. He trots out in front of the station wagon into the path of the headlights. There, 15 feet from the car, is a small, huddled form of a toad. When Ben picks it up, it moves its hind legs feebly, as if trying to get away, then hunches down on its hands. Ben runs back to Mrs. Tibbets' side of the car where she's rolled down the window. He holds out the toad, and Mrs. Tibbets shines the flashlight on it. Oh, she mutters, it's just a regular old American toad, dime a dozen. Still, it's cute. She strokes its head, then remembers how she kissed the frog in class. All right, she tells Ben. Take this little girl and put her on the other side of the road so she doesn't have to hop across it. She's so cold, she's not moving very fast. Ben carefully puts the toad in the wet grass on the side of the road and climbs back into the car. When Mrs. Tibbets pulls into her driveway and shuts off the engine, the rain sounds even louder on the roof of the car. You know, Ben, we make a good pair, you and me. Out hunting toads. She pockets her keys and opens the car door. Everyone looking for a home. Ben isn't sure what she means by that last remark, but she's out of the car before he can say anything. Put the boots on, she calls to him. Let's go in the backyard. Ben pulls off his sneakers and opens the door so he can pull the big boots on. As soon as he climbs out of the car, Mrs. Tibbets is already scurrying around the side of the house, like a kid hurrying to see what's under the Christmas tree. He follows the rain patterning on the hood of his jacket. He pulls it off his head and feels the cool wetness on his forehead and neck. As he comes around to the side of the garage, he's nearly blinded by a bright light. Oh, sorry, says Mrs. Tibbets. The beam switches off, but he can see that she has strapped the light onto her forehead, so it moves wherever she turns her head. Come on, she motions for him to follow and walks back across the grass. When she reaches to the edge of the wood, she stops so quickly that Ben bumps into her. She holds up her hand. Shh, she says. Just listen. Ben doesn't hear anything at first. At least, not anything he hasn't heard already. The rain, the thunder off in the distance, the wind in the trees, the peepers calling and the toads trilling. What? He asks. Listen, there they are. Ben listens hard. Then he hears a layer of noise in the lower register. Like a tree full of crows cawing or a bunch of people snoring. Is that the Spadefoots, he asks? That honking sound? That's them. They stand there a little while longer, just listening. Finally, without a word, Mrs. Tibbets gestures towards the woods. Flashlights still off, they walk across the yard and across the field. The thunder crashes closer now, and a torrent of rain sweeps past them. Gusts of wind blowing in the spidery branches of the trees back and forth. Ben shivers. He has to hustle to stay close behind Mrs. Tibbets. This time, she doesn't stop to look at the tree bark or the wildflowers. She doesn't even look back to make sure he's there. As they make their way through the woods, the calls get louder. Spadefoot toad voices calling out one after another, grunting for all they're worth. Ben can't help but feel like he's in a fairy tale, following a weird-ored magical woman in a dark forest. He can't believe it's real. Mrs. Tibbets stops at the edge of the pool. Dripping tree branches droop over the dark water. The pool looks bigger than it did the other day. Mrs. Tibbets puts a finger against her lips. They stand and listen. A riot of sound rises and falls all around them. They're surrounded by a crazy orchestra. The wind in the trees, the thunder in the sky, the rain pattering on the pool and their jackets, the spring peepers chirping in the distance, and the little Spadefoot toads right before them, leading the symphony. Mrs. Tibbets steps into the pool and motions for Ben to follow. The moment she wades in, the Spadefoots stop calling. It's all right, Mrs. Tibbets whispers. They'll start again. Even in wading boots, Ben can feel the cold water around his feet and ankles and legs. He shivers again. He's not sure if it's from the cold or the excitement. They stand silently waiting. Another starts up, then several more. And I don't know that I'm saying that right. I'm just kind of going with the sound. After a minute has passed, Ben figures there must be at least a dozen calling from different parts of the pool. There's a lot, Mrs. Tibbets says. Even in the dark, Ben can see she's smiling, and he smiles back. Then she laughs out loud, a high-pitched girl-like giggle. Why are you laughing? Oh, it's so silly, she says. What? My husband Thomas used to tell a story that he made up when he was little. He said that if you listen carefully when all the toads are out, you can hear the Overtoad. The Overtoad? Right. It's something he made up, like the king of the toads or the spirit toad that watches over all the toads and all the places where they live. And when they're all calling out, the Overtoad joins in. We used to laugh about it. Watch out, he'd say. It's a night for the Overtoad. Mrs. Tibbets makes a croaking sound. Can you hear it, Ben? I think tonight is a night for the Overtoad. Ben loves the idea of the Overtoad. He almost expects to see it rise up out of the pool, 25 feet tall, protecting all the little toads. He can't explain why, but he feels a chuckle welling up inside him. The laughter bubbles out of his throat and sets Mrs. Tibbets to laughing again. Ben tries to stifle his giggles, but the more she laughs, the more he does. This time, noise doesn't seem to bother the toads. They keep calling out. Ben catches his breath, then tries to imitate the Spadefoot sound. Hoorah! Hoorah! Pretty close, Mrs. Tibbets makes a higher-pitched cawing sound. Both of them stand in the pool in the rain, adding their voices to the Spadefoot Chorus, calling out to the Overtoad. It's crazy and silly and amazing. They're all saying, we're here, we're here, we're alive, we're alive. Mrs. Tibbets motions for Ben to come close to her, and she switches on the light strapped around her head. She shines it around the pool, turning this way and that, then stops the beam on a branch sticking out of the pool. She leans over so Ben can hear her above all the noise. Look, there. Ben sees the little Spadefoot in the spotlight, resting on a branch, floating on the surface of the water. Mrs. Tibbets wades over to it, and Ben follows. She picks up the toad carefully and directs the light back to the branch. Just below it, there's another toad swimming through the water. She scoops that one up too, so she has one in each hand. This is the male, the one that's calling. Here's the female. She turns it over. See how fat it is? It has a bunch of eggs to lay. Here, take a toad. The male Spadefoot crouches low in Ben's hand. It's smooth, not like the other toads that he's held. He can clearly see the 2 yellow stripes on its back. The eyes are shining metallic gold. Sorry, guys, my eyes are starting to burn. Lots of pages to read today. Mrs. Tibbets strokes her toad's head. Just think, she said, they've come here every spring. This little pool has become the home for the ancestors of these toads for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. They were probably here before people ever lived in this area. Wow, says Ben. Wow, Mrs. Tibbets repeats. Cute little guy. Yeah, Ben can feel the toad's smooth belly on his palm. Imagine a family living in a place for thousands of years. Imagine, says Mrs. Tibbets. They let the toad slip back into the water and watch them swim to the branch. Let's count the couples, Mrs. Tibbets suggests. Trying as best they can to avoid counting any toads twice, they wade around the pool, looking and listening for the Spadefoots. Working in the rain for half an hour, they come up with 16 pairs and 6 individuals. That's several more than last year, Mrs. Tibbets says. Great. It is great. It's wonderful. I think we're all done. They wade out of the pool and stand on the edge, very close to one another. It's still noisy with the rain and wind and thunder and toads and frogs, but Ben feels quiet inside. And suddenly, clearly, he knows it's time. Mrs. Tibbets? Yes, Ben. I let your snakes go. She turns her head. She's still got her headlamp on, and the bright light hurts his eyes. He can barely make out the details of her mouth and eyes and nose. She looks right at him. He holds his breath, wondering what she'll say. Oh, she says. Ben shuts his eyes to keep out the light. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I was curious, but I shouldn't have messed with the cage. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry if they got out and died. I didn't mean for it to happen. She doesn't speak. And then he feels her hand on his shoulder. It's all right, Ben, she says. I'm sorry too, but thank you for telling me. The relief is tremendous. He doesn't know why but he begins to cry. Great sobs come up from deep inside of him, catching him totally off guard. Mrs. Tibbet switches off her headlight and puts an arm around him. They stand there awkwardly by the side of the pool. The rain splats against their raincoats. Ben's body heaves up and down, but he can't make it stop. Have any of you, I wonder if you can make a connection like that, if you've ever sobbed and sobbed, kind of like a cathartic way that just released all this stress and emotion. I know I have, so I can totally make that connection. I'm sorry. Ben takes a deep breath and lets his sobs subside. I'm sorry, he repeats over and over. I'm sorry. Of course you are, his teacher says over the sound of the rain. Anyway, it doesn't really matter about the snakes now. She pauses and then she says, maybe they'll find a new home somewhere else. Wiping his face, Ben looks up at her. He thinks it's the rain, but then he sees there are tears on her cheeks too. Why are you crying? Oh, I'm sorry too. For me? Yes, for you and for all this. She sweeps her arms in a semicircle, gesturing to everything around her. What do you mean? Nothing, she says. No, really, what are you sorry about? She shakes her head again. Does it have anything to do with what your sister-in-law said the other day? She doesn't answer. What's happening? Is it something about your home? In a way. Why? How? It's very complicated, Ben. Tell me, please, Ben says. He really wants to know. For a moment, for just a second, he doesn't see Mrs. Tibbets as a teacher. It's like he's looking at her through a magical pair of binoculars that shows when someone really is, who someone really is, not how they fit into his own little model of the world. Mrs. Tibbets sniffs and laughs again, wiping the rain and the tears from her cheek with the back of her hand. Well, fair is fair. You told me your secret. I'll tell you mine. But let's do it inside over something warm. I love these toads, but I am certainly not one of them. She turns away from the pool and heads down the trail toward the house. The whole way back, Ben listens to the toads calling out, We're here! We're alive! We're here! And that is the end of chapter 10. And I told you it was a good one. In my opinion, it's very interesting that Ben feels at this point in time that he can share his secret with Mrs. Tibbets. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, either today after you listen to this or tomorrow. So I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.